In 1993, a Hollywood producer received a phone call at 3 in the morning. On the other end was a panicked assistant director with news that would have killed most productions. Their two biggest stars weren't speaking to each other, their director had just been escorted off the set, and someone had stolen $40,000 worth of antique firearms from the prop truck. The producer laughed. "Good," he said. "Now we're making a real Western." That film was Tombstone, and what happened during its creation might be stranger than anything that occurred in the actual town of Tombstone, Arizona, back in 1881. Everyone knows Val Kilmer stole the movie. Everyone knows Kurt Russell secretly directed it. But those stories barely scratch the surface of what went down in the Arizona desert during those brutal months of filming. From stolen props to sabotaged auditions, from method acting that crossed into genuine danger to a casting decision made in a hospital room, these are the 20 bizarre secrets that the studio never wanted you to know about Tombstone. Fact 1. Val Kilmer and Kurt Russell genuinely disliked each other during the first 3 weeks of production, and that mutual tension accidentally created one of cinema's greatest friendships on screen. Russell later admitted in a 2017 interview with Cowboys and Indians magazine that he found Kilmer's method acting approach insufferable at first, describing it as watching a man have a nervous breakdown in period clothing. Kilmer, for his part, thought Russell was a studio puppet more concerned with commercial success than artistic integrity. The two barely spoke off-camera during initial filming in Mescal, Arizona, but something changed during the shooting of the Oriental Saloon confrontation scene. Kilmer improvised a moment where Doc Holliday winks at Wyatt after backing down Johnny Ringo, a gesture not in the script. Russell broke character and laughed genuinely. That take made the final cut. From that moment forward, the actors realized their contrasting approaches actually complemented each other perfectly. Russell's grounded naturalism gave Kilmer's theatrical choices something to play against. The animosity transformed into respect, then genuine friendship. By the end of production, they were finishing each other's sentences in interviews. Sometimes the best chemistry comes from creative friction rather than immediate harmony. Fact 2. Michael Biehn wasn't the first choice for Johnny Ringo. In fact, he wasn't even the 10th choice. The role of the philosophical, death-obsessed gunfighter went through an extraordinary casting journey that reads like a who's who of early 90s action stars. Willem Dafoe was offered the part first, but declined due to scheduling conflicts with a stage production in New York. Then came Dennis Quaid, who reportedly wanted too much money. Gary Oldman expressed interest, but couldn't commit to the Arizona shooting schedule. Val Kilmer himself had originally auditioned for Ringo before being redirected toward Doc Holliday. At one point, the production was so desperate that they considered splitting the character into two separate villains. Biehn finally came aboard just 11 days before his first scene was scheduled to shoot, having wrapped filming on another project only 48 hours earlier. He had barely any time to prepare for what would become one of his most iconic performances. Biehn later revealed he developed Johnny Ringo's unsettling calm by studying recordings of cult leaders, specifically their ability to appear simultaneously charming and threatening. The rushed casting actually worked in the film's favor. Biehn's slight exhaustion gave Ringo a world-weary quality that a more rested actor might not have achieved. Fact 3. The cup-spinning trick that Doc Holliday performs in the Oriental Saloon, mimicking Johnny Ringo's gun twirling, was entirely Val Kilmer's idea, and he taught himself to do it in just 72 hours. When Kilmer saw the script called for Doc to mock Ringo's impressive weapon handling, he felt that simply smirking wasn't enough for the character. He wanted something visual, something that would cement Doc Holliday as a man who could turn anything into a weapon, including humor. Kilmer spent 3 sleepless nights in his Tucson hotel room with a tin cup and a handle of whiskey, practicing until his fingers bled. The production's prop master later estimated Kilmer dropped the cup over 2,000 times during his practice sessions. When filming day arrived, Kilmer nailed the trick on the 4th take. The scene wasn't originally planned to be a major moment, but test audiences responded so enthusiastically that the marketing department built an entire trailer around it. The cup spin became so iconic that Kilmer was asked to perform it repeatedly at conventions for decades afterward. He eventually had to stop because of nerve damage in his right hand, an injury he traces directly back to those 3 brutal nights of practice in 1993. Fact 4. Charlton Heston filmed an entire subplot as a cattle baron that was completely removed from the theatrical release, and that footage has never been publicly shown. Heston spent 8 days on set in late August 1993 1993, shooting scenes that established his character as a legitimate businessman being squeezed by both the Cowboys gang and the mining companies. His storyline was meant to add moral complexity by showing that the conflict wasn't simply good versus evil, but competing economic interests, destroying everyone caught in the middle. Heston reportedly delivered what crew members called his finest late-career work during a monologue about watching his son die from a fever that swept through the territory. But when test screenings ran over 3 hours, something had to go. The producers made the painful decision to cut Heston entirely rather than trim his scenes into incoherence. Heston was reportedly furious, threatening legal action before eventually accepting a significant payout to keep quiet. The footage is rumored to exist in a Disney vault. The company acquired rights through a series of mergers, but multiple Freedom of Information requests and collector inquiries have turned up nothing. Some film historians believe the Heston footage could constitute an entirely different version of Tombstone. Fact 5. Powers Boothe transformed Curly Bill Brocious from a generic villain into a charismatic monster by studying the interrogation techniques of FBI hostage negotiators. Boothe wanted Curly Bill to feel genuinely dangerous rather than cartoonishly evil, so he spent 6 weeks before production observing how skilled interrogators control conversations through careful manipulation of tone and body language. He noticed that the most effective interrogators never raised their voices during critical moments. They actually got quieter, forcing subjects to lean in and creating psychological vulnerability. Boothe applied this technique throughout his performance. Watch the scene where Curly Bill shoots the town marshal. Boothe delivers his most threatening lines barely above a whisper. This choice made test audiences so uncomfortable that the studio initially asked for reshoots with a more conventional villain performance. Director George Cosmatos refused, though the real refusal came from Kurt Russell, who recognized what Boothe was accomplishing. The decision to keep Booth's subdued menace intact created one of the most chilling Western villains in decades. Boothe later said he based Curly Bill's specific smile on a photograph he found of an actual serial killer from the 1880s, whose name he refused to share publicly. Fact 6. The Latin exchange between Doc Holliday and Johnny Ringo wasn't in the original script. Val Kilmer wrote it himself after discovering both historical figures were classically educated. Kilmer had been researching Doc Holliday obsessively for months when he stumbled upon accounts suggesting the real Holliday had attended dental school in Philadelphia, where Latin was still part of the curriculum. Further digging revealed that the historical Johnny Ringo had briefly attended a preparatory school before his family's circumstances declined. Kilmer became convinced that two educated men in the violent Arizona territory would recognize each other immediately as intellectual equals, trapped in brutal circumstances. He drafted the Latin exchange over a single weekend and presented it to the producers as a condition of his continued participation. The lines translate roughly to a conversation about whether they're dealing with an educated man or a lunatic, with Doc and Ringo circling each other's intelligence before the confrontation escalates. Classical language professors have since noted that Kilmer's Latin pronunciation is remarkably accurate for a Hollywood production. The scene became one of the most quoted in the film, despite most audiences having no idea what's actually being said. Fact 7. Sam Elliott nearly quit the production over what he called the Mustache incident of September 1993. Elliott had grown his now legendary facial hair specifically for Virgil Earp over a period of 4 months, carefully grooming it to match historical photographs of the real Virgil. 2 weeks into filming, a memo arrived from the studio suggesting Elliott trim his mustache to appear less intimidating and more relatable to mainstream audiences. Elliott reportedly walked directly to Kurt Russell's trailer, threw the memo on the table, and said 5 words: "The mustache stays or I go." Russell made a phone call. 45 minutes later, the studio withdrew its request and issued a formal apology to Elliott through the production office. The incident became legendary among the crew, cementing Elliott's status as someone who took historical authenticity seriously. Elliott later framed that original studio memo and kept it in his home office as a reminder of what he called the eternal fight between art and commerce. His mustache went on to become one of the most iconic pieces of facial hair in Western film history, spawning countless imitations and even dedicated fan pages online. Fact 8. The production nearly shut down entirely on October 12, 1993, when a flash flood destroyed 3 days' worth of footage and and swept away sets worth over $400,000. Arizona's monsoon season arrived late and hit harder than anyone anticipated. A wall of water came through Mescal Canyon at approximately 4:30 in the morning, catching the skeleton crew completely off guard. 3 camera trucks were damaged beyond repair. The film negative from recent shooting days was contaminated by mud and declared unrecoverable by Kodak specialists. Sets representing 2 different Tombstone street scenes were reduced to scattered timber. The insurance company initially refused to cover the damage, citing inadequate weather precautions in the production contract. For 72 hours, Tombstone existed in a state of limbo while lawyers negotiated. Kurt Russell reportedly spent that entire period personally calling every actor to assure them the film would continue, even though he had no guarantee that was true. The production ultimately resumed when Synergy Pictures agreed to absorb the loss rather than face breach of contract lawsuits from the ensemble cast. Those 3 lost days of footage were never reshot. The scenes were simply rewritten to work around what had been destroyed. Fact 9. Dana Delany prepared for Josephine Marcus by tracking down and interviewing 3 surviving relatives of the actual woman who became Wyatt Earp's common-law wife. Most actors would have relied on historical texts and photographs, but Delany became convinced that understanding Josephine required hearing family stories that never made it into official records. She spent her own money traveling to San Francisco and Los Angeles to meet elderly descendants who remembered stories their grandparents had told about the legendary actress-turned-frontier wife. What Delany learned surprised her. The family described Josephine as far more calculating and ambitious than history suggested, a woman who deliberately cultivated relationships with powerful men as a survival strategy rather than romantic destiny. Delany incorporated this harder edge into her performance, creating moments of subtle manipulation beneath Josephine's apparent vulnerability. The choice wasn't universally appreciated. Test audiences initially found Josephine cold and untrustworthy, leading to notes requesting Delany soften her approach. She refused, arguing that a sanitized Josephine would be a lie. The final cut represents a compromise. Some of Delany's sharper moments were trimmed, but enough remained to give Josephine genuine complexity. Fact 10. The revolvers used in the OK Corral gunfight were genuine antiques valued at over $60,000 each, and one of them accidentally fired a live round during rehearsal. Historical weapons consultant Phil Spangenberger had sourced authentic 1870s Colt single-action Army revolvers for the production, believing that real weight and balance would improve the actors' performances. What nobody anticipated was that one weapon's firing mechanism had degraded in a way that made it sensitive to jarring motion. During a blocking rehearsal on November 3, 1993, the gun discharged while holstered on an actor's hip. The bullet struck a sandbag 12 feet away. Had the gun been pointed differently, someone could have died. Production halted for a full day while every antique weapon was inspected and cleared by a certified armorer. The incident was never reported to the Screen Actors Guild, which would have triggered mandatory safety reviews and potential shutdown. Only in recent years have crew members begun discussing what happened, with some calling it the most dangerous near miss of their careers. Modern productions would never use antique weapons with original mechanisms. Replica firearms are now standard precisely because of incidents like this one. Fact 11. Jason Priestley was cast as the young deputy Billy Breckenridge before a motorcycle accident forced his replacement with Thomas Haden Church just 4 days before shooting began. Priestley, then at the height of his Beverly Hills 90210 fame, had signed on to Tombstone specifically to transition from television pretty boy roles into serious film work. He'd spent weeks practicing his quick draw and working with a dialect coach to develop an authentic period accent. Then on a Sunday afternoon in late September, Priestley crashed his motorcycle on Mulholland Drive and broke his collarbone along with 2 ribs. The injury made it impossible for him to perform the physical requirements of the role. Church received a call on Tuesday asking if he could be on a plane to Arizona by Thursday morning. He'd never held a period firearm in his life. The production provided an intensive 36-hour crash course in Western acting, covering everything from how to mount a horse to how to deliver dialogue without modern speech patterns. Church later called it the most terrifying and exhilarating 4 days of his career, a trial by fire that taught him more about screen acting than years of traditional training. Fact 12. The score for Tombstone was composed in just 18 days after the original composer walked off the project citing creative differences. One of the fastest major film scores ever recorded. Bruce Broughton had been working on the music for months when disagreements with the producer's overtone became irreconcilable. Broughton wanted a darker, more elegiac score befitting what he saw as a tragedy about doomed men. The producers wanted something heroic and propulsive that would energize audiences during action sequences. When neither side would budge, Broughton departed, taking his partially completed work with him. The production scrambled to find a replacement who could deliver 90 minutes of orchestral score before the release date. Composer Jerry Goldsmith was approached but was already committed to another project. The job ultimately went to a relatively unknown composer named Bruce Rowland, who worked 20-hour days for nearly 3 weeks straight. Rowland later described the experience as both career-making and nearly fatal to his health. He lost 14 pounds during those 18 days and developed a hand tremor from the constant writing that took months to fade. But the resulting score, with its sweeping strings and thunderous brass, became inseparable from the film's identity, proving that sometimes impossible deadlines produce extraordinary art. Fact 13. The actual town of Tombstone, Arizona, refused to let the production film within city limits, forcing the construction of an entirely separate replica town 30 miles away. Town officials had initially welcomed the production, anticipating tourist revenue and positive publicity. Then they saw Kevin Jarre's original script, which depicted Tombstone's historical residents as corrupt, complicit in murder, and actively hostile to law and order. Local business owners were furious. The mayor issued a statement saying the film would slander the memory of honest pioneers. Negotiations collapsed in July 1993. The production pivoted to Mescal, Arizona, where a permanent western town set had been maintained since the 1960s. But Mescal wasn't large enough for Jarre's vision, requiring extensive construction that added nearly $2 million to the budget. Ironically, the replica Tombstone built for the film has since become a tourist attraction itself, with visitors often preferring its cinematic grandeur to the actual historical location. The real Tombstone's city council eventually reversed course and began promoting their connection to the film anyway, conveniently forgetting their initial rejection. Fact 14. Stephen Lang was originally cast as Ike Clanton before a family emergency forced his departure, leading to Stephen Lang's replacement with Stephen Lang in what became Hollywood's strangest casting coincidence. Wait, let me clarify. The role went through 2 different actors actually named Stephen before landing on Billy Zane. The first Stephen was Stephen Lang, who dropped out. His replacement was briefly an actor from regional theater also named Stephen, who lasted 3 days before being deemed wrong for the part. Billy Zane finally inherited Ike Clanton and transformed the cowardly villain into something unexpectedly sympathetic. Zane made a controversial choice. He played Ike as genuinely terrified rather than simply villainous. In Zane's interpretation, Ike Clanton was a man who'd stumbled into violence beyond his capacity, desperately trying to survive circumstances he'd never wanted. This approach initially frustrated the directors, who wanted a more hateable antagonist, but test audiences responded to Ike's humanity. They despised him while understanding him. Zane later said he based the performance on watching footage of war criminals at trial, noting how often genuine evil wears the face of ordinary fear. Fact 15. Val Kilmer consumed an estimated 200 cups of whiskey-colored tea during production because Doc Holliday appears drinking in nearly every scene, and actual alcohol would have made continuity impossible. The tea was specially blended by the prop department to match the exact amber color of period-appropriate bourbon under the specific lighting conditions used on set. Each batch had to be tested against footage from previous shooting days to ensure consistency. Kilmer reportedly grew to despise the taste, describing it as what sadness would taste like if sadness were a beverage. But he refused to use water or apple juice like many actors do for drinking scenes, believing audiences would subconsciously recognize the visual difference. The dedication to this minor detail exemplifies Kilmer's obsessive approach to the role. He also insisted on using period-accurate glassware, rejecting modern reproductions that the prop department initially provided. The production eventually sourced genuine 1880s drinking glasses from antique dealers across 3 states, at a cost of nearly $8,000 for vessels that appear on screen for mere seconds at a time. Fact 16. The Vendetta ride sequence was filmed over 11 consecutive days in temperatures exceeding 115 degrees, and 3 horses had to be retired from film work permanently due to exhaustion. Animal welfare representatives were present throughout production, but the Arizona heat proved more brutal than anyone anticipated. Despite constant hydration efforts and scheduled rest periods, the physical demands of repeated riding sequences in period-accurate heavy tack took a severe toll on the animal performers. One horse collapsed during the 6th day of filming and never fully recovered its stamina. The production ultimately flew in replacement horses from a ranch in Montana at considerable expense. Kurt Russell later expressed genuine remorse about the animal welfare issues, calling the Vendetta ride the one part of production I wish we'd handled differently. The sequence appears in the finished film for approximately 4 minutes, meaning each minute of screen time required nearly 3 full days of shooting under brutal conditions. Modern productions would likely use a combination of CGI enhancement and climate-controlled environments to achieve similar results without the same physical cost. Fact 17. John Tenney, the only actor wearing a fake mustache in the film, developed a severe allergic reaction to the spirit gum adhesive that required daily medical attention throughout his 6 weeks of shooting. The reaction began as mild redness around his upper lip during the first week. By week 3, Tenney was experiencing painful blistering that had to be carefully concealed with makeup before each application of the prosthetic mustache. The production's medical supervisor recommended switching to a hypoallergenic adhesive, but testing revealed the alternative products couldn't hold the mustache securely enough for the physical demands of Tenney's scenes. Tenney made the decision to continue with the original adhesive despite the discomfort, receiving cortisone treatments each morning and antihistamine injections each evening. He later described the experience as 6 weeks of having my face slowly consumed by my own costume. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. Tenney was the only actor who couldn't grow his own mustache due to a previous filming commitment, and his dedication to the production's authenticity standards ended up causing him more physical suffering than anyone else's facial hair choices caused them. Fact 18. The famous line, "I'm your Huckleberry," almost didn't make the final cut because studio executives believed modern audiences wouldn't understand 19th century slang. Internal memos from September 1993 reveal extensive debate about whether Doc Holliday's most memorable phrase would confuse viewers or make them feel excluded from the film's world. One executive suggested changing the line to "I'm your man" for clarity. Another proposed adding a brief explanatory exchange where another character asks what Huckleberry means. Val Kilmer reportedly threatened to walk off the production if the line was altered in any way. Kurt Russell backed him completely, arguing that audiences were smart enough to understand meaning through context and delivery. The line stayed. It became not just the most quoted dialogue in the film, but one of the most recognizable phrases in Western cinema history. The executive who'd pushed hardest for changing the line later sent Kilmer a letter acknowledging he'd been completely wrong, calling it a valuable lesson in trusting artistic instinct over market research. Fact 19. A deleted scene exists showing Wyatt Earp breaking down and weeping after Morgan's death. Footage Kurt Russell personally requested be removed because he felt it contradicted the character's emotional arc. The scene was filmed on October 28, 1993, and reportedly represented some of Russell's finest dramatic work on the production. Crew members who witnessed the filming described it as devastating and almost unwatchable in its intensity. Russell sobbed uncontrollably for nearly 4 minutes of continuous footage, but when he reviewed the dailies, Russell made an unexpected request: cut it entirely. His reasoning was psychological rather than egotistical. Russell believed that showing Wyatt's complete emotional breakdown would actually diminish the power of his subsequent violence during the Vendetta ride. If audiences saw Wyatt process his grief through tears, the brutality that followed might seem like recovery rather than descent. By keeping Wyatt's pain internal, the violence becomes an expression of unresolved trauma rather than catharsis. The scene remains in a vault somewhere, unseen by anyone outside the original production team. Russell has consistently refused requests to include it on anniversary editions. Fact 20. The final scene of Tombstone, Doc Holliday's death in the Colorado sanatorium, was actually the very first scene filmed during production, shot before Val Kilmer had spent any time with the rest of the cast. This scheduling decision was made purely for logistical reasons. The Colorado location was only available during a narrow window in early August before production moved to Arizona. But the choice had profound creative consequences. Kilmer walked onto set on his first day Holliday, having never interacted with Kurt Russell as actors, having never built the rapport that would define their on-screen friendship. He had to imagine the relationship that would develop over the following 3 months. Kilmer later called it acting in reverse time, describing how he had to perform Doc's final moments of vulnerability and love for Wyatt before understanding what that friendship would feel like. Remarkably, when Russell finally saw the death scene footage months later, he said it perfectly captured everything their characters had become to each other, as if Kilmer had somehow seen the future of their performances and filmed the ending before the beginning existed. 20 facts, and yet the strangest detail about Tombstone might be what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. In 1997, 4 years after the film's release, a fire destroyed a storage facility in Burbank, California. Among the items lost were an unknown number of film cans containing alternate takes, deleted scenes, and test footage from various productions, including material from Tombstone that had never been cataloged or transferred to safer formats. Nobody knows exactly what burned that night. Some crew members believe the lost footage included extended versions of several gunfights, additional scenes with Charlton Heston's removed character, and an alternate ending where Doc Holliday's fate remained ambiguous rather than conclusive. But here's the question that haunts everyone who worked on this film. Somewhere in Kevin Jarre's original 4-hour cut, the version that got him fired, there was apparently a scene that explained why Doc Holliday really came to Tombstone. Not for his health, not to follow Wyatt, something else entirely. Something that cast the entire friendship in a different light. Jarre took that secret to his grave in 2011. And now, maybe it's ash in a Burbank warehouse. What did Doc Holliday know? What was he really running from? We had the answer once. Someone chose to destroy it. If this journey into Tombstone's hidden history surprised you, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling us which fact shocked you most, and like this video if you believe some stories are better left unfinished. I'm your Huckleberry, and I'll see you in the next one.